to the 86th episode of Impact Media Presents. I'm Kelly Redmond, your host and Executive Director of Impact Media and Entertainment Coalition. Today, I have a very, very special guest who's going to help me celebrate Black grandmothers. Welcome, Lisa Bennett, an author of Just Keep Living, Conversations with Granny. How you doing, sister?
What's happening, Kelly? How are you?
We finally did it.
I know, right? We've been talking about this for a while.
Over several subjects, several topics. This is so perfect and so timely. You know, I was sharing with you last week, April 13th was my grandmother, the anniversary of my grandmother's birthday. And I'm like, what else can I do to honor her? And I'm like, I know. Lisa and I are going to get on here and talk about our grandmothers and talk about your amazing book. I absolutely love it. Just Keep Living, Conversations with Granny. Let's first tell everybody how we met. And this is my 86th episode, and I met you in 1986 at Drake University. You were directing our gospel choir. And I saw you jamming to the countdown, by the way. I said, we're going to have a good time here today.
I'm musical, and I have my grandmother to thank for that. As a matter of fact, growing up in church, and my grandmother was third generation preacher.
Yes.
And so I made fourth when I went to seminary. And but I've always been a part of the musical world. Actually, a fun fact about her is when James Cleveland and Dorothy Norwood, Shirley Caesar were the Caravans back in the day, she was one of the members of the Caravans back then.
Oh, wow.
And then she left the group, married my grandfather. So that's that.
That's your mother, and that's that. Yes.
Yeah. So my
grandmother was a church lady too. This is actually me and my grandmother at her 75th birthday party, which was her last. I was 25, and we surprised her, but you could tell by the look on her face. She that was right at the door. She saw all the people as we opened up the door. Just one of my absolute favorite memories of her.
Yeah, and you know what too? That's funny. The cover has that picture of me kissing her. Yes. And that was years ago. I had no idea that, when I did that picture, we were in the studio doing some family pictures because we wanted generational pictures and we wanted to do 4 generations. And I just said, come here, girl, let me kiss you. You never know, thinking it would make a cute something someday. But I never really fast forward. I mean, it's 10 years later that I actually wrote a book and used that photo. And I was just like, oh, actually, that's perfect. Yes. For this project. And thank God for my grandmother, because the subject matter behind the book is she saved my life, but that we won't get all into that just yet.
Well, it is what it is. And that, like I said, when you think about the importance of the role that Black grandmothers have played in our communities over the centuries, I mean, it's just indescribable. It's, undeniable, the impact that they've had over years.
I hope that I'm even a quarter as great of being a grandmother to my grandchildren as here's the blessing for me. I didn't have just one. My grandparents were married in 1940 something, and they were divorced in 47. And so by the time I came along in the 60s, they actually were remarried again. So I had several grandmothers, and I was blessed enough to grow up with 3 grandmothers. And then my great grandmothers were still alive until I was 30 something years old. So I've always just had an abundance of blessings in that respect. And I just pray that I'm half as great to my grandkids as my grandmothers were. But this one in particular was just crazy. Crazy in a fun way, because I lived with her in my adult life. And so I lived with her a lot as a kid too, off and on, because actually I rotated depending on what my mother's schedule was. If she was working, my mother was in college at the same time when she was working full time. And prior to that, she was in the military. She had retired. And so as my mother worked, depending on what night of the week it was, that grandmother would pick us up from school, and then we'd either go to one church or the other church or to the bingo hall. Depends on what grandmother it was, but either way it went, I was going to be with a grandmother that night, spend the night. She'd get us dressed for school, and then the other grandmother's day was the next day, and they would rotate because my mother was in school full time or working full time. So, like you said, grandmothers are cornerstone and pillars to my existence anyway.
Absolutely. I grew up, my mother was working. She was both of my parents,
Right,
professional working. And so, my grandmother played a huge part, in raising me, taking me to church,
right.
Manor Christian Church on the south side of Chicago. She was the April birthday club leader. So her birthday was always like super special because I was there at the tea helping her set the table and serve all the church folks. So just
It's funny about that too. Is like I said, I was in church. Man, I always said when I got off to college, I'm so churched out with these old women. I'm never going back. But then like you said, got to college and did what? Directed the gospel choir. Because as much as I wanted to get away, it was the thing that anchored me back to home in this brand new world that I was exploring. So and then went off to grad school, and guess what? Went to seminary. So I didn't run too far. My grandmother would say, "Train up a child in the way you want them to go, and they'll never depart."
Absolutely. It's so funny. I told you yesterday, one of my regrets is that I didn't join the gospel choir, when you were there, my freshman year. But I was off on some other stuff, saving the world, doing BEI and all kind of stuff as a freshman.
You had your own cape on, doing your thing.
But, that would have definitely been fun for me. And I'm starting to, ended up joining choirs, more gospel choirs later because I've done it before. But, you all just look like you were having so much fun. And I was like, oh.
Man, we had a blast. I mean,
music is so centering.
And because we were at a campus that was predominantly European, right? Was what, 50, 60, I think maybe 80 of us on the campus. I remember we had a list called the Blacklist. And it was an honor. I remember we had a couple of folks who were not Black per se, but they were people of color who had made the Blacklist, and they were excited, like, "Whoa, I made your Blacklist," because they had no community. But it was that, while we did have fraternities and sororities on the campus, that was that larger community of fraternal sorority love that we shared. And so that just bridged the gap between all of it. And it was just such a wonderful, wonderful time. And luckily for us, we had folks from Drake who had stayed in the community, stayed connected, that stayed on as our guidance counselors and that kind of thing. So it was just, if I could go back to those days, I wouldn't trade it to be in the atmosphere the kids are in now. But if I could go back to those days and stay in that little time loop, I would go back and stay, because I had the best time in college. Too good, to be honest. And my mother let me know that I was having too good of a time because she did not like my grades.
Well, there you go. There's a balance. Yeah, my grandmother actually made it to campus for my graduation, and President Ferrari actually had me do the invocation. So that meant a lot to my grandma and her brother, my Uncle Bob, who had never traveled after he left Mississippi once he got to Chicago. The only time he traveled was to come to Drake for my graduation.
And Drake's such a beautiful place, beautiful campus. So for my grandmother, the one in particular that the book is about, every year she would come and stay every summer that I was at Drake.
And I was like, she made it to Drake. That's great.
Every summer she came for a month.
Wow.
She continued to do that right through grad school. When I moved to New York and did grad school, she did that up until, oh my gosh, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s. She came out once a year every month in the summer and stayed a full month. And I actually, after I graduated from grad school, I worked on a college campus for 23 years doing operations and project management. And she would continue to come out. So even my students got to know my grandmother over the years.
Well, let's dig into it. Tell me some of your favorite. There are so many funny stories in your book and sayings about from your grandmother. What are a couple of your favorites?
You know, I don't know if I have a favorite. See, all of them were so important to me at the time because I was recovering right from this mental health crisis that I was having. And I was just blessed, again, blessed and grateful to be able to have
Yeah.
so much to fall back on because I was just down and out. And I only put out about half of what we had because I didn't think anybody would care as much as I found out that people
Mhm.
do care and that
Yeah.
people resonate with the stories. But I think, one of the things that really helped me was my I was sitting in the dining room, and the phone rang, and I remember picking it up and saying to the guy, I'm telling you about you folks keep calling here. I keep telling you my mother's deceased.
That's
Stop
favorite.
bothering me. Yeah, stop bothering me. I've sent out letters. I've done all of this stuff. And I think it was a bill collector or somebody like that. And of course she hadn't paid the bill. She's been deceased at that point for about 6 months. And
Wow.
so so the phone rings and I said somebody for my mother. My grandmother's like, oh, okay. I think a couple days goes by and the phone rings and she grabs it. And she says, hello. And she said, okay. She said, you know what? She moved. Hold on. Hold on for a second. And I think she puts the phone down for a minute and she says, okay, wait a minute. Here you go. Here's her number. And she rattles off this phone number. And I am so puzzled. I'm looking at her like, what is going on? Because nobody's living here at the time except she, myself, my wife, my grandmother. So it's 4 people. And I'm going, okay. So I said, well, who was that? She said, oh, that was somebody looking for your mama. And I'm like, what? So I'm confused. I said, well, what number did you give him? She said, oh, I gave him the number to the cemetery because
When I read that, I said, "This is my favorite." I have
I'm
never
calling.
Oh, everybody needs to use that one.
And
Oh,
I was like, she said, I gave them to the cemetery. Maybe they'll get the point. And I was just like, okay. And so it freed me to laugh about it because in my mind, I thought about doing something like that at one point, but I thought I can't do that because I don't want to send my grandmother into shockwaves and make her think I'm making fun of the fact that my mom is deceased, which is her child.
yeah,
But when she did it, I was like, oh, shoot, gloves off now.
exactly. Oh my goodness. It's no excuse to what these folks will do calling. My mother even got a call. I can't remember if she said the name on the caller ID was my grandmother's best friend's name or they were asking for her. But either way, it was just like, this is weird. This is really weird. She didn't have any namesakes, but
Right. And the other one was this one freed me too. And I got a letter from a young woman in Las Vegas, and the letter touched me so much. As a matter of fact, I think she shared part of it on Amazon as part of her review and feedback for the book. I was sitting on the bed in my grandmother's room and I was crying. I was having a really difficult day. My mother and I were super, super, super close. I had gotten to the point, I left my job at the university after 23 years of service and went into consulting.
Mhm.
Literally, to make a long story short, my consulting salary doubled what I had made at the university. And I was doing pretty well. I was the youngest African-American administrator at the university at that time, but I was doing okay. But I didn't know how much more my skill set was in demand in the corporate sector and in consulting in particular. And so I gotten this nice corporate consulting gig. And I said to my mother, you don't even have to work no more, sister, sit down. And so we were so close. She retired. She was traveling with me. She and my wife and myself would go on trips. I would be on a project somewhere, some part of the country, and she and my wife would jump a plane and come out and they'd shop and sightsee. And I would tell them all the time, I'm out in California, I'm working and they're off at Knott's Berry Farms and Disneyland and Disney World. And I'm like, something's not fair about us being in San Francisco and you guys are down on the wharf and I'm in the office somewhere and I'm paying for it all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, going on cruises and just doing stuff all the time. And so for my mother to just be what I felt like was just snatched out of the center of my universe,
Yeah.
just took damn near just took me out.
Mm.
And so I was sitting on the bed and I'm teared up and my grandmother said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I miss my mother." And she said, "Oh." And she turned her head back around and just kept watching TV as if I had said nothing. And I was kind of pissed off. I was angry
Yeah.
because how dare you dismiss my pain?
Right. Right.
And so I got as feisty as I could get, all right, without getting disrespectful so I can get slapped. And I said, "Well, don't you ever miss her?" Like,
Right.
yeah. And my grandmother said, "How stupid are you?"
Uh-oh.
Of course I miss her. That's my child. What kind of stupid question is that? And then she's saying that, and so I was just sitting there. She said, "You know what your problem is? You always trying to be God.
Mm.
You just need to accept." I said, "Well, don't you ever get upset just missing?" She said, "I talk to her all the time. Who
Mm.
told you that the relationship with her stopped because you can't see her in the physical? Every time you smell something and it reminds you of your mama, that means she's present. You don't see God, but you know when he here. Stop
Right.
being so stupid. You always want to be in control, and when it don't go your way, so you sitting around here acting mad and being mad. Nobody made up them rules and told you the relationship with your mother had to stop. You did that on your own. So I don't care, basically, that you pissed off about it. Get over it." And I was
Wow.
just like, how dare you? But
Right.
but that was true, right? We know when somebody or some spirit or something is with us. And so the relationship doesn't stop, but because we're here in the physical and that's what we know, it's not like we've ever experienced Jesus in the physical. So we never had an expectation or anything compared to. But when you have a loved one that's close that you can physically hug and touch and kiss, when they
Yeah.
go away, you kind of think it ends. And so she freed me to say, "Oh, I can't have this conversation with my mother." And then there are times when I'm like, "Yep, I heard that clear as a bell, Ma. Thank you." Because I'm contemplating something or thinking something and I get an answer. And so she taught me something in that moment. But that was the piece that the young lady wrote me about because her father had passed. And she said, "Your grandmother freed me because I felt captive or like I was held hostage by my father's death and I could not just move through it." And so I love that story because she freed me in that moment. And I didn't know, again, that it would have the impact that it has had on other people.
Yes. Yes. No, thank you for sharing that. And, tell us about, a little bit more. I know you said some about it already, but why you wrote the book and how your faith has sustained you on this journey, and especially through, as you mentioned and opened up about your, kind of bout with mental health.
Yeah. So after my mom died, and right before that, 4 months before, my mother's younger sister passed away. So, as far as I was concerned, my grandmother was like a trooper. Both of them at the time. Actually, all of my grandparents were still alive when my mother and her younger sister both passed.
Mm.
My mother's younger sister passed in August of 2015. And so we're trying to deal with that. And she has two children. My mother has two children, and I have some step siblings too. But the four of us are here in town wrestling with the fact that my aunt had just passed away because it felt like we lost our second parent. And
Mhm.
we were like surrounding my mother, saying, "Well, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay." My mother and my aunt were so close; they were like what people call Irish twins, where they just cannot be apart and one gets sick without the other. I
Yeah.
mean, and they've been on cruises and away from each other out of town and have to cut trips short to get back to one another. And
Wow.
so my mother's younger sister died in August of 2015. And then that December, my mom looks at my cousins and I, we're standing at my young cousin's house having dinner. And she looks us in the face and she's crying. And it's, of course, our first Christmas without my aunt. She says, "I can't do this without my sister." I don't
Mhm.
even want to do this without my sister. And we're going, well, slow your roll, Sally. Hold on.
Right, right.
It's gonna be all right. We here, we got you. We need you to have us. So anchor down, we're gonna be good. And 10 days later, my mother was gone. Um, and it just ripped my heart out. And again, my mother and my aunt had been here. My grandparents were about 92, 93-ish at the time, and they were all still alive. But my mother and my aunt were their caretakers. So now we shift from being the grandchildren to being to having to bury our parents and be the caretakers of
Yes.
these. I call them old people. I became a geriatric village after, and having the financial responsibility and the emotional responsibility of all of that. And at the time, again, I had just taken a job in Chicago with a consulting firm and moved back to the area. So I had moved here in March. My aunt dies in August. My great aunt dies in October. Then my mother dies in January. And we're trying to deal with all that now. Mind you, I've got 2 kids in college already. 2 kids were on their way to college in May, and I had just changed jobs and bought a new house.
That's,
Right? I was juggling a lot. And around March of 2016, I said, I can't take this. I waited till my wife was out of town, and then I planned my escape, which I tried to take my own life. I had just gotten to the point where I just couldn't deal with the amount of pressure, the amount of pain on the job. In my practice, I was the only African American manager in my entire practice at a corporation. In the office in Chicago was 5,000 people. So, right, I'm only 4'9", and so to hold that kind of supposed position, presence, to represent, you know how it goes.
yes.
When you're the only one at the table, sometimes you got to represent everything, even though everything's not the same to other people. It looks like it is, and you're supposed. So it was just so much pressure that I
Yeah.
just succumbed to everything, and I tried to take my own life. And so I was fast forward, and I was in the hospital trying to get better, trying to recover. And my grandmother, the one I wrote the book about, bust her way into the ED, boy, and she laid me out.
Ooh,
Who did I think I was? Cutting God's plan short. That's my problem. Always thinking I'm God, trying to control everything. Leave God alone. Let him do his job. Stay in my lane. So she did. I mean, she ripped me up, and then she ends it all by saying, "And if you're not here, who gonna take care of me anyway?" This wasn't about you, but okay. So of course, I have to take some time off the job because I can't perform.
Yeah.
Take some time off the job. I'm in counseling. I've got a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, pills to sleep, trying to turn my brain off. And I start to do okay, well enough to get back to work, right? And try to start living life again. A set of my grandparents died the following September. And so, and then they died. Their 50th wedding anniversary was September 2nd. My grandfather dies on the 10th. My grandmother then dies on the 14th. And the 24th. And I'm just like, not again. I can't. And so, right. So by this time, I've moved in with the grandmother that's on the front of the book with me because she is 93. She can't take care of herself. And so every day, she and I are having these conversations. And the book, ultimately, the book is a collection of those conversations. But it doesn't hit me. So I'm doing okay. I'm back at work and we're doing our thing. And then she gets sick in February 2019 and she goes in the hospital. And so I tell the job, I ain't coming back until she get out of here. She passes away on May 19th of 2019, May 15th, 2019. And I literally slept in the hospital every night with her, except for about 5 of those days. And there are stories in the book, those 5 days that I left where she cut up, which you already kind of know about, her calling 911 and different things like that.
Had the police show up.
Had the show up and everything.
Here I'm being held against my will.
Right. And she was mad. She says, I didn't tell them that. She said, I told them I was being held against my will. And I said, you cannot call the 911 operator. You know, she was like, I didn't do nothing wrong. I told them that I'm an adult and I'm being held against my will. And I was like, what did you think was going to happen? She said, I want to go home. And so, luckily for me, though, once she passed, I started to spiral back down. And while I was in counseling this time, my therapist asked me to start journaling. And the only thing I can think about is her. And so I started to journal all of her shenanigans that had happened over the last 3 years. And that's what ultimately turns into the book. But as you know, since you've read the book, you know, it's stuff like calling the police and telling them that she's ready to go home and she's being held against her will. You know, it's comical now, but at the time I was like, I'm gonna strangle this old woman.
I can only imagine.
You know, and you know, the other story I'm gonna share with your viewers really quickly is she was in a facility. I decided I was gonna go home for the evening and sleep in my bed. And you know, she would just cut up every now and then, just be defiant. And so they were trying to get her to take some medicine or something. And they called me, they said, hey, Lisa, she's acting up. She won't cooperate. I said, tell her that if she doesn't cooperate, you're going to call her grandchildren. They said, we already tried that. I said, okay, I'm on my way. So I get in my car and I go out to the hospital. It's early in the minutes. It's dark outside, but it's early morning. And I said, now go in the room and I'm going to stand out in the hallway and tell her you're going to call her grandchildren if she really doesn't, you know, you're tired of telling her that you're going to call. And so she said, well, call them. I raised them. They didn't raise me. Pick one. Call Rhoda. Call Lisa. Call Chucky. Call one of them. Call them. So she doing it. And I said, what you say? I stuck my head in the door. She said, oh, y'all tricked me. Oh, foot. Just give it to me. Just give me the medicine. And I was just like, really? You really got to cut up like that? Just cooperate, woman, please.
Yes. Oh, Lisa, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for just writing the book and celebrating your grandmother, all grandmothers, because you captured what a lot of us experience in some ways. And I mean, even I love your sayings at the back of the book, because there were some I thought I was country, you know, from my Mississippi roots, and I would know, you know, all the sayings, but I'm like, there were some sayings on there. I'm like, I think the one, well, hen's fruit being eggs and State Street chicken being neck bones. I had never heard those two.
Yeah, she had a vocabulary all her own. You know, we used to have to teach the people at the hospital because they'd say, she keeps telling us, don't bring her no more nervous pudding. And I was like, and they said, well, what is that? I said, she don't like Jell-O. I'm like, I don't get it. I was like, it shakes. It's nervous pudding. It shakes. She don't want that. So stop bringing her. And I, you know, I had to take food to her every day. And she actually tricked some of them and had them cooking meals and bringing it in. And they broke all kinds of rules. When she passed away, I think the hospital staff from 3 hospitals, the staff from 3 different hospitals showed up because they were just like, she was so freaking comical. And so even the morning she passed away, I came home to get the house ready because we were going to bring her home on an oxygen tank. And they said, you know, there's nothing else we can do. She's 96 years old, just a little bit of that and a little bit of this. But the moment you tinker with this, it's like an old car. You tinker with that, you're going to find out something else is wrong. So just let her live it out. And I called her and she called me early morning. She said, what time are you coming to get me? And I said, listen, I'm going to be there as soon as they finish hooking up this oxygen thing in your room. She said, well, hurry up. So they hang up. The nurse called me right back. She said, Lisa, she's driving us crazy. I said, go. They said, can we get a dress? I said, get a dress, comb my hair, do all that stuff. I brought all the other stuff home. I'll be there about noon. She said, well, bring my girls some lunch. Bring some Popeyes and some biscuits and she gave me this whole order. I want to have one last lunch with them before I leave. I mean, driving people crazy. But by the time I got there, she was gone. But her orders to me was to make sure that the women who took care of her had lunch. And so that's what we did. They cried all through lunch. I cried all through lunch, but they had lunch that day because that was her. She was just going to be in control to the end.
Yeah. You got it from her. She said, why are you trying to be in control all the time? But she taught you through her actions. What a beautiful, beautiful tribute. I really appreciate you coming on. I encourage everyone to get Just Keep Living Conversations with Granny. The website is below, justkeeplivingthebook.com. Lisa, thank you so much. And I know you've got all kinds of other projects going on. So I'm sure you'll be back. And I want to thank you too for being a supporter of Impact Media, not just, supporting through encouragement and tuning in, but also being a donor. That means so much to me. Thank you so, so much. And I will see you soon. I won't see you at Relays, but I've got another special campus engagement at.
Well, I ain't mad at you. Go celebrate your baby because, we only get to do that once or twice before they don't want to be bothered with us anymore.
Exactly.
At least for a little while.
Exactly. But we will be seeing you soon. We will be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great, great week.
You too.
Take good care. Thank you so much for tuning in as we talked about and celebrated grandmothers and author Lisa Bennett and her book, Just Keep Living, Conversations with Granny. And we also did a tribute to my grandmother, Maxine Collins, who was my best friend. And as a grandmother, she actually went to visit my brother at Misericordia Home every single day. She took the bus. That was what she did for a living. Once my brother actually became ill and had to live at Misericordia Home with children with mental and developmental disabilities, she was a very, very special lady. My mother and I say every day we strive to be more like her. So salute to all the Black grandmothers out there, all the caretakers of our elderly, and those who strive to be like their grandmothers, because they definitely paved the way for us to be our best selves. Thank you so much and look forward to having you back real soon. Take good care. Have a blessed day.